Horror gives you two endings. That is all. Either the monster is destroyed and the world snaps back into place, or the monster wins and the world does not. The priest throws himself out of the window and the girl wakes up clean. The family is consumed and the credits roll over the ruin. Expulsion or defeat. Two doors, and every horror film you have ever seen has walked through one of them. The Babadook, directed by Jennifer Kent in 2014, walks through a third door that nobody had built. At the end of the film, a woman goes down into her own cellar carrying a bowl of earthworms. Something down there in the dark moves and rattles and threatens her. She does not run. She sets the bowl on the floor, waits, and climbs back up into the light, where her son is playing in the garden. The monster is alive. The monster is still in the house. The monster is being fed. And the film presents this as healing. Any other horror film would call that scene a loss. The creature survives. The protagonist has become its keeper. The haunting is now a routine. I want to argue that it is not a loss, that it is not even a compromise, and that it is, in fact, the single most honest ending anyone has filmed about human pain. To see why, we do not need a theory of ghosts. We need two ideas, one from Freud and one from Jung, that explain with uncomfortable precision why some monsters cannot be killed, and why the attempt to kill them is exactly what makes them stronger. Start with the fact the film hands you almost in passing, because everything turns on it. Amelia is a widow. Her husband died in a car accident while driving her to the hospital to give birth. The day he died is the day her son was born. Every single birthday Samuel has is also the anniversary of the catastrophe, and has been for 7 years. And Amelia has solved that impossible arithmetic in the only way she could manage. She does not celebrate on the actual date. She does not say her husband's name out loud. She does not go down into the cellar where his things are kept. The entire house is a machine built for not remembering. Freud wrote the diagnosis in 1917 in an essay called Mourning and Melancholia. And the distinction he draws there looks small and is decisive. In Mourning, Freud says, it is the world that becomes poor and empty. You suffer, you withdraw, you weep. And slowly you manage to detach your attachment from what you have lost, until you can invest yourself somewhere else. It is painful and it moves. In Melancholia, it is not the world that becomes poor and empty. It is the self. The loss is not worked through, it is swallowed. The lost object is not released, it is taken inside, where it goes on living. And then Freud writes one of the most beautiful and most frightening sentences in the history of psychoanalysis. The shadow of the object fell upon the ego. Hold that word, shadow. It comes back. What happens when the shadow of the object falls upon the ego is that everything you felt toward what you lost is now aimed at yourself. And here is the part nobody wants to hear. Among those feelings, there is always anger. Freud is insistent about this. Every loss carries ambivalence, because we love and simultaneously resent whatever abandons us. In ordinary mourning, the ambivalence gets lived and digested. In melancholia, it is unsayable, and what cannot be said outward turns inward, where it becomes self-accusation, exhaustion, and a slow, corrosive hatred of the self. Now look at Amelia's situation through that lens. The child cost her the husband, not through anyone's fault, not through anyone's choice. But the brute fact stands. The boy arrived in the same instant the man was taken. What can a mother feel about that and still remain a mother anyone would call acceptable? Nothing she can say aloud. Not to her sister, not to the social workers, not to herself. And so the film gives us a woman who cannot sleep, who cannot feel pleasure in anything, who moves through a house drained to gray and blue, who works a job emptying bedpans for the dying, who flinches from her own child's noise. That is not a woman being haunted by a spirit. That is a clinically exact portrait of a 7-year melancholia. And then the book arrives. Nobody buys it. It is simply on the shelf one night, a children's pop-up book called Mr. Babadook. Amelia reads it aloud to Samuel and stops halfway through because the pages have turned into a threat. And the book states the law of the entire film, and possibly the law of the unconscious itself. If it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. You cannot get rid of it. That is not a curse. It is a description. And this is where Jung takes over. Jung called the shadow that part of the personality which consciousness refuses to recognize as its own. It is not evil in the moral sense. It is simply everything that will not fit the picture we have built of ourselves. Cruelty in someone who believes they are gentle. The wish to escape in someone who believes they are devoted. Rage in someone who believes she is a loving mother. And Jung makes an observation that Kent films almost literally. The less the shadow is integrated into conscious life, the blacker and denser it becomes. Repression does not eliminate anything. Repression only transfers authority. Whatever I refuse to own as mine begins to act upon me, as though it came from outside, with a will of its own, choosing its own hour. Watch how precisely the creature obeys that rule. It does not come in from the street. It rises out of the cellar, which is to say out of the one room in the house Amelia has forbidden herself to enter. The room where the dead man's belongings are kept. It has no stable form, because what has never been named cannot have an outline. It is a coat, a shape on the ceiling, a sound, a pair of hands. And it grows. It grows in exact proportion to the effort spent denying it. She tears the book apart, and it returns whole. She burns it, and it comes back with new pages, more detailed, more explicit, showing her the things she will do. A shadow that is fought is a shadow that is fed. Which brings us to the scene most viewers read as possession, and which is in fact the opposite of possession. Amelia, taken over by the creature, turns on her son and tells him that many times she has wished it had been him who died instead of his father. Look carefully at what happens there. That is not a line invented by a monster. It is a true sentence that the monster merely permits. The horror of the scene is not an entity speaking through a woman's mouth. The horror is a woman finally saying the thing she has never been able to say. The thing that has been inside her since the first day. In Kent's film, possession is not invasion. Possession is disclosure. The Babadook brought nothing in from outside. It is what was locked inside, and it broke the door because the door was held shut too hard. That is why the ending works, and why it is the most radical gesture in the film. Amelia does not kill the creature. She is also not defeated by it. What she does is face it, roar back at it, refuse it the child, and then give it something it did not have before. A place, the cellar, a room in the house, inside the house, underneath ordinary life, but with a door, a staircase, an address. And every day she goes down there, brings food, and comes back up. Translate that, and you have Jung's definition of individuation almost word for word. The shadow cannot be exterminated, because it is made of the same material you are. What is possible is to make it conscious, to give it a known location, to hold a regular and deliberate relationship with it instead of a permanent war. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. but by making the darkness conscious. A bowl of worms carried down a staircase is that sentence, filmed. It is not submission to the monster. It is the exact opposite of submission. It is the refusal to go on pretending the monster is not there. And in Freudian terms, it is the passage, finally accomplished, out of melancholia and into mourning. Amelia goes down into the cellar, which means she enters the room where her husband's things are. What was incorporated and mute now has a place, a time, and a ritual. The pain has not ended. It has simply stopped being a clandestine occupation and become a scheduled visit. Now let me turn the mirror, because this film is not about an Australian widow. We live inside a culture that treats grief as an efficiency problem. There is an unspoken deadline on sorrow, and it is short. There is enormous pressure to move on, to process, to turn suffering into a presentable lesson with a takeaway at the end. There is an entire industry promising that whatever hurts can be eliminated, whatever is missing can be optimized, whatever shames you can be deleted, and the result is a population of exhausted, sleepless people snapping at their own children, unable to feel pleasure in anything, exactly like Amelia in the first 40 minutes. Every one of them convinced that the problem is a personal failure of willpower. The Babadook says no to that, and it says it brutally. Some things do not pass. Some losses do not heal, they take up residence. Some anger is legitimate and is not going to evaporate because it is ugly, and the only available health in the face of that is not elimination. It is tenancy. You do not get cured of what you lost. You learn to walk down the stairs every day and feed it so that it does not have to come up. Which returns us to where we started and to what this does to the genre. Expulsion, the first ending, tells you that evil is external and can be driven out. And it is a lie that we find comforting. Defeat, the second ending, tells you that evil is larger than you are. And it is a truth that leaves you nothing to do. Kent invents a third ending. And it is the only one that corresponds to any experience a human being actually has. The monster is not destroyed, and the monster does not win. The monster is recognized, bounded, and kept. So The Babadook is not a film about a haunted mother. It is a film about the only thing that can be done with what refuses to leave. And the question it leaves you with is not whether there is something in your cellar, because there is something in everyone's cellar. The question is whether you have ever had the courage to go down there with the bowl, where art does not console, it autopsies.